What is this? Grandma, what were you hiding? This can't be real.
Dust choked Aldric Mitchell as he stared at the eviction notice. His ex-wife took his home, his savings, and his pride, leaving him to sleep on a damp basement floor with his 6-year-old son. He thought his life was over. Then, his crowbar hit a hollow wooden panel. The Evanston suburbs were painted in the vibrant, dying colors of late October. But for 34-year-old Aldric Mitchell, the world had entirely lost its color. He stood in the driveway of the 4-bedroom craftsman home he had painstakingly restored with his own hands over the last decade, clutching a cardboard box filled with the last of his belongings. It was mostly just old winter coats, a few framed photos that hadn't been contested in mediation, and a chipped coffee mug his son, Leo, had painted for him in kindergarten. Behind him, the heavy oak front door swung open. Bethany stepped out onto the porch, clutching a steaming cup of artisan coffee. She looked immaculate, as she always did, cashmere sweater, perfectly blown-out blonde hair, and an expression of profound, exhausting pity that made Aldric's stomach twist into agonizing knots. Beside her stood Richard Caldwell. Richard was a junior partner at one of Chicago's most aggressive real estate law firms. He wore a bespoke Navy suit that probably cost more than the rusted 2012 Subaru Outback Aldric was currently loading his life into. Richard wasn't just the man who had represented Bethany in the divorce. He was the man who was moving in the moment Aldric's tires left the pavement. The affair had been going on for a year before Aldric caught them. In the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the family court system, Aldric had been outgunned, outspent, and systematically dismantled. Bethany kept the house to maintain stability for Leo. She kept the joint savings account because Aldric's independent contracting business had temporarily dipped during the proceedings. Aldric was left with joint custody on paper, a mountain of legal debt, and absolutely nowhere to go. "You're sure you have everything, Aldric?" Bethany called out, her voice floating over the manicured lawn. "I really don't want to be mailing boxes of your old tools to Indiana." "I have it all, Bethany," Aldric muttered, slamming the trunk of the Subaru. The metallic crunch echoed down the quiet suburban street. Richard adjusted his expensive watch, stepping forward with a practiced, predatory smile. "Look, Aldric, we know this is a transition. If you need a few hundred to cover a motel for the week while you get on your feet, I'm happy to write a check. It's best for Leo if his father isn't sleeping in a car." The condescension dripped from Richard's words like acid. Aldric's jaw tightened until his teeth ground together. He wanted to cross the lawn. He wanted to wipe that smug, patronizing smile off Richard's face. But he looked into the back seat of his car. Little Leo was strapped into his booster seat, clutching a stuffed golden retriever, watching his father with wide, worried brown eyes. "Keep your money, Richard," Aldric said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I have a place." He didn't wait for a response. Aldric got into the car, put it in drive, and pulled away from the life he had built, leaving his ex-wife and her new fiancé standing on the porch of his stolen kingdom. The place Aldric had was the only lifeline he had left in the world, though it felt more like an anchor tied to his neck. 6 months prior, Aldric's grandmother Clara had passed away at the age of 92. She had left Aldric her home in Gary, Indiana, a crumbling, century-old Victorian that had been slowly succumbing to gravity and neglect for 3 decades. The drive took an hour, the scenery shifting from wealthy, tree-lined avenues to the gray, industrial decay of the Rust Belt. When Aldric finally pulled the Subaru up to the curb of Clara's house, his heart sank into his boots. The house was a towering silhouette of peeling lead paint, rotting eaves, and overgrown dead weeds. The front porch sagged dangerously to the left, and a heavy padlock secured the warped front door. "Is this our new house, Daddy?" Leo asked from the back seat, his little voice trembling slightly. "It looks like a haunted house from Scooby-Doo." Aldric forced a smile, blinking back the hot sting of tears. "It's just an adventure, buddy. We're going to fix it up. It'll be like camping indoors for a little while." He unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The smell hit them instantly, a suffocating wave of dust, mildew, mothballs, and 50 years of hoarding. Clara had been a child of the Great Depression, and she never threw anything away. Newspapers from 1984 were stacked, ceiling high in the hallway. Broken lamps, tarnished silver trays, and bags of mismatched clothing covered every square inch of the living room floor. It was unlivable. If a social worker from Family Services saw this, they would strip Aldric of his remaining custody rights in a heartbeat. Bethany and Richard would make sure of it. Aldric waded through the debris to the kitchen, setting his cardboard box on a cracked linoleum counter. There, sitting atop a pile of junk mail, was an envelope with a bright red stamp from the Lake County Assessor's Office. With trembling hands, Aldric ripped it open. It was a final notice of foreclosure for delinquent property taxes. Grandma Clara hadn't paid her taxes in 5 years. The total owed was $43,215. If the debt wasn't paid in 60 days, the county would auction the house. Aldric leaned his forehead against the grimy kitchen cabinet, letting the paper slip from his fingers. He had $22 in his checking account. His credit was destroyed. He had no home, no wife, and in exactly 2 months, he wouldn't even have this rotting monument to his grandmother's hoarding. He was utterly, hopelessly trapped. "Daddy?" Leo tugged on Aldric's pant leg. "I'm hungry." Aldric took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his dirty sleeve. He looked down at his son. He couldn't give up. He couldn't let Richard win. "Okay, pal," Aldric said, his voice cracking only slightly. "Let's get a pizza. And then tomorrow, we are going to start cleaning. We're going to find something in this house to sell, and we're going to save our home." For the next 2 weeks, Aldric existed in a state of blistering, agonizing physical labor. While Leo was at school, a grueling 2-hour round-trip drive back to his district in Illinois every morning and afternoon. Aldric waged war on the house. He rented a commercial dumpster on a high-interest credit card and began shoveling out the decades of refuse. He found nothing of value. The antique furniture was too termite-damaged to sell. The old jewelry boxes held nothing but tarnished costume pieces and plastic pearls. Every day the county deadline crept closer, and every day Aldric felt the crushing weight of his failure pressing down on his chest. By the end of the second week, the upper floors were clear enough to be habitable, but the basement remained untouched. It was a subterranean nightmare. The wooden stairs were slick with dampness, leading down into a cavernous, windowless space that smelled of wet earth and decay. It was late on a Friday night. Leo was asleep upstairs on an air mattress, clutching his stuffed dog. Aldric stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, holding a harsh LED work light. The shadows danced menacingly across mountains of rotting cardboard boxes, rusted garden tools, and a massive, hulking shape against the far wall. It was an antique oak wardrobe, easily 8 feet tall, practically bolted to the concrete floor by decades of undisturbed gravity. Behind it, the concrete foundation wall was weeping water, creating a massive puddle in the center of the floor. Aldric knew if he didn't clear the wood away from the damp wall, black mold would spread through the floor joists, making the house structurally condemned before the county even had a chance to seize it. Exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep and cheap black coffee, Aldric approached the wardrobe. He wrapped his blistered hands around the ornate wooden trim and pulled. It didn't budge. It was waterlogged, weighing hundreds of pounds. Frustration, anger, and a profound sense of grief suddenly boiled over inside him. He thought of Bethany's cold eyes. He thought of Richard standing on his lawn, offering him pity money. He thought of his little boy sleeping on an air mattress in a condemned house. With a guttural scream, Aldric threw his entire body weight against the wardrobe. He braced his boots against the slick concrete and pushed with everything he had. His muscles tore. His back screamed in agony, and the wood groaned in protest. Crack! The rotting base of the wardrobe splintered. The massive piece of furniture tipped forward, crashing onto the basement floor with a deafening boom that kicked up a century of dust. Aldric collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, coughing violently as the particulate cloud washed over him. He waited for Leo to wake up crying, but the house remained silent. Slowly, Aldric grabbed his LED work light and pointed it at the wall where the wardrobe had stood since before he was born. He froze. The concrete foundation wall was uniform, except for a 3-foot wide section directly behind where the wardrobe had been hiding it. Instead of poured concrete, this section was boarded up with vertical slats of beadboard, painted gray to match the foundation. It was a false wall, and it looked completely out of place. Curiosity overrode his exhaustion. Aldric walked over to his tool bucket, pulling out a heavy steel crowbar. He jammed the wedged end into the seam between the beadboard and the concrete. He threw his weight against the steel. The wood shrieked, ancient nails giving way in a spray of rust. Aldric pried again, snapping a board in half. Behind the wood, there was a dark, recessed cavity built directly into the earth, behind the foundation. He aimed his flashlight into the hole. Sitting on a small cinder block, protected from the dampness of the floor, was a heavy, olive-green metal lockbox. It looked like a military surplus ammunition crate, but it had a heavy brass padlock securing the latch. Aldric's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He reached into the dark cavity and pulled the box out. It was shockingly heavy, coated in a thick layer of grime. He set it on the broken remains of the wardrobe. He didn't bother searching for a key. He took the heavy steel crowbar, raised it above his head, and brought it down on the brass padlock with a fierce, metallic clang. It took 3 brutal strikes before the brass shackle snapped. His hands were shaking violently as he unhooked the latch and pushed the heavy metal lid open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the box was bone dry, smelling faintly of cedar and old paper. Resting on top was a stack of old silver certificates, $20 bills from the 1950s. Aldric thumbed through them quickly, maybe $2,000 or $3,000. It was enough to keep the lights on and feed Leo, but it wouldn't save the house. Beneath the money was a bundle of letters tied with twine, addressed to Clara from someone named Arthur Aldric's grandfather, who had died before Aldric was even born. But it was what sat at the very bottom of the box that made Aldric stop breathing. It was a thick, legal-sized envelope, yellowed with age, bearing the embossed seal of the state of Illinois. Across the front, written in a beautiful, sweeping cursive script, were the words, "Last will, testament, and warranty deed." Aldric wiped his filthy hands on his jeans before carefully opening the unsealed flap. He pulled out a stack of heavy, watermarked parchment paper. The first document was a standard legal deed. Aldric read the text by the harsh glare of his flashlight. Warranty deed grantor, Arthur James Mitchell grantee, Clara Jean Mitchell date, the 14th of November, 1978. Aldric frowned. His grandfather had transferred property to his grandmother, but as Aldric read down to the property description, his confusion deepened into absolute bewilderment. The address wasn't the house in Gary, Indiana. It wasn't anywhere in Indiana at all. Property address, Parcel 402, Block 18, West Loop District, Chicago, Illinois. Legal description, the entire corner lot spanning 1.2 acres, bound by Randolph Street and Peoria Street. Aldric sat back on his heels, the cold dampness of the basement seeping into his bones. He knew Chicago real estate. He had lived in the suburbs his whole life. The West Loop in 1978 was a desolate wasteland of abandoned meatpacking plants and empty warehouses. But the West Loop today? It was the single most expensive, highly sought-after commercial real estate market in the entire Midwest. Tech giants, Michelin star restaurants, and luxury high-rises dominated every square inch. And according to the piece of paper trembling in his hand, his grandmother Clara, who had died hoarding trash and owing $40,000 in back taxes, was the sole, legal owner of an entire city block in the heart of the district. Aldric didn't sleep that night. He sat at the grimy kitchen table, his cracked smartphone plugged into a portable battery pack, his eyes burning as he scoured the internet. He typed the parcel number and address into the Cook County Assessor's public database. The web page loaded slowly on his terrible cellular connection. When the property details finally appeared on the screen, Aldric nearly dropped his phone. Status: active. Owner on file: the AJM Blind Trust. Current use: commercial surface parking lot. Assessed: land value: $14,500,000. $14.5 million, just for the dirt. Aldric's mind spun violently. How was this possible? How could Clara live in utter poverty, clipping coupons and letting her roof rot, while holding the deed to a $14 million gold mine? He dug deeper into the public records, trying to piece together the history. According to a digitized news archive from 1976, his grandfather, Arthur Mitchell, had been a mid-level enforcer and bookie for a prominent Chicago syndicate. The land had been transferred to Arthur to settle a massive illicit gambling debt from a desperate meatpacking magnate. 2 years later, Arthur, likely knowing he was going to prison, or worse, quietly transferred the deed to a blind trust with Clara as the sole beneficiary, entirely off the public radar. Arthur died in a car accident 6 months later. Clara had never touched it, maybe out of fear, maybe out of shame of how the land was acquired, or maybe she had simply convinced herself it wasn't real. The trust had quietly paid the minimal property taxes on the empty lot for 40 years, using funds Arthur had hidden away. But Aldric noticed something else in the county records. A recent zoning application had been filed for that exact parcel just 3 months ago. A massive $300 million luxury residential high-rise was slated for construction on the lot. The developers claimed they had secured the land through an arcane legal loophole, adverse possession, claiming the land had been abandoned because the Blind Trust's tax fund had finally run dry 2 years ago, and no owner had stepped forward to claim it. Aldric looked at the name of the development firm listed on the zoning application. Developer: Caldwell and Hayes Commercial Real Estate. Aldric's blood ran cold. Caldwell. Richard Caldwell's family firm. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Richard wasn't just a divorce attorney. His father owned Caldwell and Hayes. Richard had likely overseen the title search on the West Loop property. He had seen the name Mitchell. He had seen the connection to an heir in Evanston. That was why Richard had been so aggressive in court. That was why he had swooped in to romance Bethany, tearing Aldric's life apart, distracting him, ruining him financially so he couldn't afford a lawyer to fight for his own name. Richard knew Aldric was the sole surviving heir to the Clara Mitchell estate. If Aldric was bankrupt and living in a condemned house in Indiana, he would never have the resources to realize what he owned, let alone fight a billion-dollar firm in a Chicago courthouse. "Daddy?" Aldric jumped, spinning around. Leo was standing in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes, his dinosaur pajamas dragging on the dirty floor. "Are you crying?" Aldric reached up and touched his face. His cheeks were wet. He hadn't even realized it. It wasn't sadness. It was a terrifying, electrical surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "No, buddy," Aldric said, walking over and lifting his son into his arms, squeezing him tight. "Daddy's not crying. Daddy just figured out how we're going to fix the house." At 9 a.m. sharp on Monday morning, Aldric walked into a cramped, dusty office above a bail bondsman in downtown Gary, Indiana. The frosted glass door read, "Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law, legal aid and estate planning." Sarah Jenkins looked like a woman who had survived on nothing but spite and stale diner coffee for a decade. She was in her late 30s, wearing a slightly wrinkled blazer, her desk completely buried under mountains of manila folders. "I don't do criminal defense anymore, and if you're here for a pro bono divorce, you're 2 months too late to get on my calendar," Sarah said without looking up from her typing. "I'm not here for a divorce," Aldric said, pulling up a cheap plastic chair. "I'm here because my grandmother, Clara Mitchell, told me before she died that if I ever needed a lawyer who wouldn't back down from a fight, I should find you." Sarah finally stopped typing. She looked up, her piercing blue eyes narrowing as she studied Aldric's exhausted, hollowed-out face. "Clara Mitchell? The lady over on Elm Street who baked those terrible fruitcakes? That's her." Sarah sighed, leaning back in her creaking chair. "Clara paid my electric bill when I was a broke law student renting a room down the street from her. I owe her. What's the problem, Mr. Mitchell? The county trying to seize the house?" "Yes," Aldric said, "but that's the small problem. I need you to look at this." He unzipped his backpack and pulled out the yellowed, state-sealed envelope. He placed the 1,978 warranty deed carefully onto the only clear space on Sarah's desk. Sarah picked it up, her expression a mask of bored professional courtesy, but as her eyes scanned the legal description, her posture changed. She sat up straight. She adjusted her glasses. She read it again, her lips moving silently. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice suddenly void of any sarcasm. "I found it hidden behind a wall in Clara's basement," Aldric said. "I did some digging. A firm called Caldwell and Hayes is trying to claim adverse possession of the lot. They break ground on a high-rise in less than a month." Sarah immediately spun to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a frantic intensity. She pulled up the Cook County Chancery Division dockets. "Adverse possession on a $14 million commercial lot? That's incredibly bold," Sarah muttered, her eyes darting across the screen. "They filed a quiet title action 6 months ago. They claimed they made a good faith effort to locate the heirs of the AJM Blind Trust, but declared them legally unlocatable." 6 months ago, Aldric said, his jaw clenching. "Right around the time a junior partner from that exact family firm started sleeping with my wife and aggressively expediting my divorce." Sarah froze, looking at Aldric in stunned silence. "Wait, you're telling me the lawyer representing your ex-wife is Richard Caldwell?" Aldric finished. "He engineered my financial ruin so I wouldn't have the money or the mental capacity to fight the quiet title action. He was trying to steal my family's land right out from under me." Sarah let out a low, impressed whistle. "That is a disbarment-level offense. It's fraud, it's a massive conflict of interest, and it's highly illegal. But Mr. Mitchell, Caldwell and Hayes is a billion-dollar machine. They have 50 corporate litigators on retainer. I operate out of a strip mall and my printer is currently out of cyan ink. If we file a motion to halt their development, they will bury us in paperwork until you starve to death." "I have nothing left to lose, Miss Jenkins," Aldric said, his voice cold and steady. "They took my house. They took my wife. They tried to take my son. I am not letting them take this. Will you help me?" Sarah stared at the deed, then at Aldric. Slowly, a dangerous, predatory smile spread across her face. I've been looking for a reason to ruin a white-shoe Chicago law firm my entire career. Let's go hunting." Before Aldrich could reply, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was Richard Caldwell. Aldrich showed the screen to Sarah. She nodded, hitting the record button on a small dictaphone on her desk and pointing to it. Aldrich answered the phone, putting it on speaker. "Aldrich, my man!" Richard's slick, booming voice echoed in the small office. "How's the new bachelor pad treating you? Settling into Indiana?" "What do you want, Richard?" Aldrich asked, keeping his tone flat. "Look, Bethany and I were talking. We feel bad about how things shook out. We know you're staring down the barrel of a nasty tax foreclosure on your grandmother's junk estate. It's not a good environment for Leo. Get to the point." "I'm feeling generous," Richard said smoothly. "I have a buddy who flips distressed properties. I can get him to cut you a check for 50 grand today. Cash. It pays off your tax debt, leaves you with a few grand to get a decent apartment, and all you have to do is sign over the estate rights to me as a proxy so I can handle the county paperwork for you. Clean break. What do you say, Dave?" Aldrich looked at Sarah. She was grinning like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. She mouthed 3 words to him. "He doesn't know." Richard didn't know Aldrich had found the deed. He was trying to buy the entire estate, including the hidden assets of the trust, for $50,000 to permanently eliminate the legal liability before breaking ground on the high-rise. Aldrich leaned into the phone, his voice dripping with a newfound, terrifying confidence. "I think I'll hold on to my grandmother's junk estate a little while longer, Richard. You'd be amazed at what you can find buried in a basement." The line went dead quiet. Mitchell spent the next 21 days operating in absolute terrifying silence. He did not return his ex-wife's passive-aggressive text messages regarding child support adjustments. He ignored the increasingly frantic, threatening voicemails from Caldwell, who was desperately trying to force the $50,000 buyout of the grandmother's estate. Instead, Mitchell and Sarah Jenkins spent every waking hour inside her cramped, unventilated office, building an airtight, impenetrable legal fortress. They ordered expedited handwriting analyses, pulled decades-old tax records, and hired a private investigator named Thomas Nolan to trace the timeline of Caldwell's involvement in Mitchell's divorce. The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Caldwell had personally conducted the title search on the West Loop property 18 months ago. He had discovered the Mitchell family connection. 2 weeks later, he had miraculously appeared at a charity gala attended by Bethany, initiating the affair that would destroy Mitchell's family. It was a calculated, sociopathic masterclass in corporate theft. Caldwell had systematically drained Mitchell's finances through brutal divorce litigation, ensuring the single father would be too destitute to fight a quiet title action on a billion-dollar commercial lot. But Caldwell had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the original deed was lost to history. The groundbreaking ceremony for the new West Loop high-rise was scheduled for a crisp Tuesday morning. The development firm had already erected a massive, temporary chain-link fence around the 1-2-acre dirt lot, wrapping it in glossy banners bearing the Caldwell and Hayes corporate logo. Local politicians and Chicago real estate magnates were slated to arrive at noon for champagne and photo opportunities. At 8 a.m. sharp, Sarah walked into the Cook County Courthouse. Standing before the Honorable Judge Harrison Wright, she filed an emergency injunction to halt all construction alongside a quiet title defense and a massive tort claim for fraudulent concealment and professional malpractice. At 9:30 a.m., Mitchell and Sarah walked through the revolving glass doors of the towering skyscraper that housed Caldwell and Hayes. Mitchell was no longer the broken, defeated man who had been banished to a rotting house in Indiana. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit bought off the rack just yesterday, but worn with the uncompromising posture of a man holding all the cards. They took the private executive elevator to the 72nd floor. The doors parted to reveal a sprawling, glass-walled reception area with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked, eyeing them with polite suspicion. "We are here for the 10 o'clock senior partner briefing regarding the West Loop development," Sarah said smoothly, not breaking her stride. Before the receptionist could check her visitor log, Sarah pushed through the heavy mahogany double doors of the main boardroom. The room was vast, anchored by a 30-foot marble conference table. At the head of the table sat William Hayes, the ruthless, gray-haired founding partner of the firm. Several other executives were reviewing blueprints. And there, sitting halfway down the table, was Caldwell, looking exceptionally smug in a custom Italian suit. Beside him sat Bethany. She was likely there to sign the final financial disclosures for the wedding, basking in the glow of her fiancé's imminent corporate triumph. The moment Mitchell walked through the doors, The air in the room evaporated. Bethany gasped, dropping her designer pen. Caldwell's smug smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, chalky pallor. He shot up from his leather chair. "What is the meaning of this?" Caldwell demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Security is going to escort you out. You are trespassing, Mitchell." "Sit down, counselor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room like a bullwhip. She tossed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the center of the pristine marble table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. William Hayes frowned, peering over his reading glasses. "Who are you, and what is this about?" "We have a press conference in 2 hours. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I represent the sole legal heir of the AJM Blind Trust, and you won't be holding a press conference today, Mr. Hayes. In fact, if you don't listen very closely to what I am about to say, you won't have a law firm by Friday." Sarah unclasped the folder and pulled out the yellowed, watermarked 1978 warranty deed. She slid it across the marble directly to William Hayes. "This is the original, state-sealed deed to the West Loop parcel," Sarah announced, projecting her voice so every executive in the room could hear her. "My client's grandmother was the sole beneficiary. Your firm filed a quiet title action, claiming the heirs were unlocatable." Sarah turned her piercing gaze to Caldwell, who was now sweating profusely, his hands trembling against the edge of the table. "They weren't unlocatable," Sarah continued, her tone dripping with venom. "Your junior partner found my client 18 months ago, and instead of notifying him, he initiated a romantic affair with my client's wife, orchestrated a malicious divorce to bankrupt him, and intentionally expedited the foreclosure of his remaining assets to ensure he could never afford legal representation. It is the most egregious case of predatory malpractice and fraud I have ever seen." William Hayes stared at the original deed, the color completely drained from his face. He was a veteran litigator. It took him exactly 4 seconds to calculate the catastrophic liability sitting on his table. If this went to trial, the firm wouldn't just lose the $14 million land. They would be hit with hundreds of millions in punitive damages. The firm would be dismantled by the ethics board. "Richard," Hayes whispered, using a dangerous, breathless tone. He slowly looked up at his junior partner. "Tell me, she is lying." Caldwell opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Bethany, who was staring at him in sheer, uncomprehending horror. He looked at Mitchell, whose eyes were as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. I can fix this, William," Caldwell stammered, backing away from the table. "We can settle. It was a strategic oversight." "You arrogant, stupid liability!" Hayes roared, slamming his fist onto the marble so hard the coffee cups rattled. "You jeopardized a $300 million development to save a few million on a buyout? You are finished. You are fired. And when the state bar is done with you, you won't be able to find work drafting wills in a strip mall." The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. William Hayes immediately cleared the boardroom of everyone except Sarah and Mitchell. Knowing a public trial would destroy his legacy, Hayes capitulated entirely. Behind those closed mahogany doors, they negotiated a settlement that would remain sealed forever. Mitchell didn't just demand the market value of the dirt. He held the entire development hostage. If the firm wanted to break ground and appease their investors, they would have to pay a massive premium. Hayes agreed to wire $45 million to an irrevocable trust in Mitchell's name, clear all of the tax debt on the Indiana property, and personally guarantee the permanent disbarment of his former junior partner. As Mitchell and Sarah walked out into the executive hallway, they found Bethany standing by the elevators. She looked utterly devastated. The glamorous illusion she had traded her family for had just shattered into a million pieces. Caldwell was already being escorted out of the building by security, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, a poetic mirror to the way Mitchell had left his own home just a month prior. Bethany took a hesitant step toward Mitchell. Tears were streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. "I swear to you, I had no idea what he was doing. He manipulated me. We can fix this. We can go back to how things were, for Leo's sake." Mitchell stopped. He looked at the woman he had loved for a decade. He felt no anger anymore. He felt absolutely nothing at all. "You didn't know about the land," Mitchell said quietly, his voice echoing in the empty marble hallway. "But you knew you were breaking my heart. You knew you were taking my son away. You knew you were leaving me with nothing. You don't get to come back just because I found something you missed." He stepped past her, got into the elevator, and pressed the button for the lobby. He didn't look back, as the doors closed on his past forever. 6 months later, The Indiana spring breathed new life into the old Victorian house on Elm Street. Mitchell hadn't demolished it. He hadn't sold it. Using a tiny fraction of his newly acquired fortune, he had hired the best historical restoration architects in the Midwest. The sagging porch was rebuilt with premium cedar. The peeling lead paint was replaced with a pristine, vibrant coat of navy blue. The massive hoarding piles in the basement were cleared, and the foundation was reinforced. It stood proudly on the block, a towering monument to the grandmother who had unknowingly saved his life. Mitchell didn't live there full-time anymore, though he kept it perfectly maintained. He had purchased a sprawling, beautiful estate in a quiet, highly rated school district just outside of Chicago, where he and Leo had plenty of space to breathe. It was a Sunday afternoon. Mitchell sat on the restored porch of the Indiana house, drinking coffee from a chipped mug Leo had painted in kindergarten. The sun was shining. The air was warm. Leo came running out the front door, wearing a brand new baseball uniform, clutching his favorite stuffed golden